just being cognizant of everyone's time. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to webinar 2 of the International Consortium on Dementia and Wayfinding Summer Webinar Series. For those that are new to joining in on this series and haven't met me, my name is Nolana Neubauer, and I am a postdoctoral fellow out of the University of Waterloo in Canada, and I am one of the co-founders. The other co-founder is Katie Gambier-Ross out of the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So just to give you all a little bit of a disclaimer before we get things started, so the opinions expressed by our participants and our presenters today are of their own, and they're not representative of the consortium. And just some general housekeeping, please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. For the purpose of our presenters today, and just because we have so many people that are joining in, we're going to try to engage in the conversation through the chat box, if at all possible. The webinar is being recorded, so people will be able to view it at a later time. The recording will be available by our website when it is ready. It's still not ready yet. Hopefully by next week we'll have better news. But in the meantime, we will be posting it on our YouTube channel that we've developed, and it will be sent to all attendees via email when it is available. I've been trying to do that right after we're done the webinar today. And we'll also be trying to share it far and wide by email as well as by our social media accounts, such as Twitter. Please feel free to type any of your questions into the chat box. You can do it during the presentation in case you forget, or you can wait and do this during the Q&A session. So to give you all a little bit of a recap from last week's first webinar series session. So last week we had Doctors Meredith Rowe and Libby Bowen were invited to serve as our first speakers. And this was largely due to their involvement in the past consortium that consisted of primarily American members who were academics. So both were also part of Al Gaze's group that originally coined the term wandering, which is now a key word in the academic literature and is associated with the kinds of behaviors that Dr. Rowe had described last week. So when we created the International Consortium on Dementia and Wayfinding, we consulted with these earlier American researchers and sought their endorsement to resurrect the consortium. We used the word wayfinding instead of wandering and expanded the membership beyond academics in North America to include persons living with dementia, their care partners, first responders, and other stakeholders outside of academia. We intentionally asked Meredith and Libby to provide the first presentation so that we could have a historical reference. However, as we progress through the webinar series over the next 5 weeks, we will see how terminologies have evolved over the years, including from the perspectives of persons living with dementia. Our session today will kick things off by sharing the policing perspective as it relates to search cases, profiling, as well as a new concept called self-sovereign identity. So an overview of today's webinar, the way that things are going to work is we're going to do a 10-minute presentation from each of our presenters, followed by a 5-minute Q&A. We'll be kickstarting things off with Constable Mike Adler. He has 21 years of experience as a police officer with Ottawa Police Service in Canada, including 11 years as a search manager. He has been a member of the Emergency Services Unit since 2007, and for the last 16 years has been a part-time law professor in police foundations at Algonquin College in Ontario. Following this, we'll be having 2 co-presenters. So we're going to have Dr. Rebecca Stenberg, who is a researcher at the Center for Advanced Research in Emergency Response at Linköping University, with a special interest in search for missing persons. And her fellow co-presenter is Anders Leet, who is a police inspector, national training coordinator, police rescue services within the Swedish Police Authority and the National Training Division. So he has been a MISPER instructor since 1998. And then finally, we'll finish things off for this morning or afternoon for those of you across the pond's webinar. With myself, I will be co-presenting with Jamie Sterling. Jamie is the president of Secures.io and SAR1. He has 28 years of search and rescue experience with the Ontario Provincial Police, including 6 years as the Provincial Search and Rescue Coordinator. And he was also a past member and chair of the Ground Search and Rescue Council of Canada. So that is it for me for now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to leave it up to you, Mike, to share your screen so we can get things started.
Sorry, I was just unmuting myself there. Just give me 1 second to set this up, everybody. How's that look?
It looks perfect. You're good to go, Mike.
Amazing. Sorry that you can't see me. I've got a brand new encrypted computer here in the police service, and I guess they don't want me to see, but if just imagine a very handsome Hollywood actor, and that's pretty much what I look like, if anybody's wondering where to come from. Jamie knows. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Nolan. It always makes me feel a lot better when you put it like that. It makes me feel pretty professional. I would like to talk to you just about a recent case study from us in Canada here. I think it's important to talk about these things for a few reasons. I mean, primarily it links the the theoretical to what's actually happening, and these things aren't meant to shock or upset anybody, but I do think it's important to remember these people and talk about these things in a variety of ways. And it also from my standpoint, it continually points out the issues that we have associated with search and rescue for people who are living with dementia who go missing. And these are quite universal, I find, from speaking to the other partners throughout the world. So I bring it up today as an example of some of the complications that we have when we are developing a subject profile and then relating that to what our search strategy is going to be. And then also this particular one was unique. So Mrs. Joy Ficco, this was on April 28th of this year. It's not too long ago. She's described as a 70-year-old female who lives with her husband being her primary caregiver. One of the issues we had from the onset when we were assessing this is there was no diagnosis of dementia, although it certainly appeared from the information and the situation that we were dealing with that this was most likely what caused this person to go missing in the first place. You can see there that I've outlined some of the verbiage that was used when we asked about her, which was a declining mental state, confused at times, possibly paranoid, and then also depressed as of late. And I put those three statements in different colors because really, if you're looking at a subject profile and placing a missing person in a particular profile, those are all three very different things that we would have to determine from a standpoint of strategy when we're out looking for somebody. And it becomes complex for us if we have these sort of generic type terms as opposed to someone who says, yes, they have seen a doctor, they do have dementia, and then we can go further from there. So that was the first complication we had. She left around 5:30 in the morning out the front door of her house that was left unlocked. She was wearing no footwear, no pajamas. The temperature overnight was quite cool. It's springtime here in this area of Canada, so -1 overnight, but the temperature actually went up to about 20 that day. No precipitation. The door is usually locked. This particular time, it was either left unlocked or it was unlocked by Mrs. Ficco. We're not too sure. When we look at those highlighted statements at the top, the mental state declining, confused, etc., what we found was when we were trying to develop an initial subject profile and defining them as, is this person suffering or living with dementia, or are they in fact suicidal or despondent? Those are very polarized behaviors, and they, some of the places where we would look for people is the same, but behaviorally it would manifest itself very differently. So that was what we were challenged with. With regards to timeline, around 5:20 in the morning, the police are notified, but by that time, and as typified in a lot of these instances, there was quite a lag time in which she could have gone missing anywhere between 11 o'clock that night previous until 5:30 in the morning. What happened was her husband woke up and noticed that she was gone, which is common. Approximately 9 minutes later, we have our first officers on scene, and over the next hour, we have additional officers, including K9, and then our on-duty search and rescue officers, which is my unit, attending as well. And then 7:30, a search manager is requested, led ultimately to a call out. And from our perspective, a call out is a doubling or tripling augmentation of the amount of resources we have, mainly ground search. And we ultimately had about 35 additional police out. We had our aerial unit, our drones, K9, and marine officers because there was, you know, this area was completely surrounded by a river. Ultimately, a few hours later, she's located about 2.3 kilometers from her residence. When we don't have real solid information from either the caregivers or the complainant, we often ask accompanying questions, and that's our ability to try and profile this person. We combine, as everybody does when they are associating a missing person with potential search, the statistical data from whatever source you're talking about, whether that be ISRID or maybe Grampian or something like that. And then we also have to know exactly what about this person is unique. And we combine those two things together to develop the profile. We knew that she went out for walks every day, but unaccompanied. And that's a huge thing for us. Unaccompanied, meaning was it related to her medical condition, which was Parkinson's, or does she not have the capability to navigate? We also knew that she attends daily the area of what's called the mill, which is sort of a picturesque sort of historical mill next to a river, which was almost a direct line from her home. She walks the same route around her home in the same direction every day. But lately, we also found that she was described as quite depressed due to the isolation related to COVID. She had not seen anybody except for her husband. She was terrified of this, and this lent theory to the paranoia, as well as was she depressed, which could ultimately potentially lead to despondency and maybe suicide. Historically, we knew that recently, in the recent weeks prior to this, she had heard a siren wailing near her home, went out to investigate that, was concerned that it was one of her family members who lived nowhere near, which lended a little bit more theory to maybe we were dealing with someone who was living with dementia-related symptoms. In the search and rescue world, everybody who is in that ultimately knows that it's important to have a primary category. What caused this person to go missing? What led them to go missing? It's not uncommon that we have dual categories. So for example, you may have someone with an intellectual disability who is camping and becomes separated from their group. But we are going to be looking at the intellectual disability as a behavioral function, as opposed to the fact that they're a camper. But in this scenario, if she is dementia versus if she is despondent, that can quite radically change our plan of attack with regards to how we're going to find her. So that was a challenge for us. That's her walking route you can see there. I apologize. It's not that great. I used Microsoft Paint. I'm not good at it. If you could appreciate the yellow arrows, that took me about an hour to get in there. But the red star, Nolana, can you see me circling the red star with my cursor there? Just nod if you can. Can you see me doing that?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, you just need to nod. So that's where she lives, generally speaking. She takes this route around here, which is the pink highlighted. She goes this direction and she wanders around with her husband again back to her home, or she on a daily basis goes from her home here directly across, there's a little bridge there, to what we call Watson's Mill, which is the area she frequents every day. As you can see around this, they call it the island. This particular part of Ottawa is quite nice. Everybody wants to live there, but most of them can't afford it. And they call it the island, although it really isn't. It's just a river that encompasses this area. And there's only two real areas that the person can get off that island. So with regards to hazards, we were quite concerned with that. So ultimately, the conflicting information that we got on whether or not she left home as it related to depression or dementia, and also from family members, what we see sometimes when we're asking qualifying questions, we call, there seems to be often conflicting information on their opinions of what the capabilities of their loved one are, how far they can go, where they might go. You may ask a question, do you think that they would be able to find their way home if they went on their route? Oh, absolutely, where someone else may say, no, there's no way, they never go out unattended. That can be conflicting to us about what their capabilities or where they might have problems when they come to certain decision points. But again, we had to go with what the history said and what the most likely scenario was when we do a scenario analysis, and we determined that this was likely related to something along the lines of dementia. With our area of operation, that's the satellite image. You can see again where I'm circling that's where she lives. All this massive water area around here, and there's really only two areas that she can get off this area of her residence or her neighborhood. And if she goes, if she zigs this way or zags that way, very quickly you can become in the rest of the world. And over here you can see it starts to get quite rural. So this area of Ottawa used to be just a town. It was amalgamated into the city, and this is all residential. And then over here on the left-hand screen, you can see where it's quite urban and there's a lot of businesses. So this is where she lives, where the red arrow is, and this is the area we're concerned. If you look at her walking route, if she goes down this direction, right at the bottom of your screen here, that's a pathway that leads right into the river. So obviously the river was a primary area of concern for us, and that's essentially where we devoted most of our resources. That's a screenshot from our software. You can see where the point last seen is in that red dot. We have our range rings, which is our statistical data, and along this river down here you can see this little red dot where ultimately where she was located, tragically face down in the river and had drowned. What we believe happened was she probably walked from her home to the area of this mill where she goes daily. This part of the river, it's very cold at this time of the year, quite significant current, and we believe that it wasn't obviously a walking route that she went down, that the current this brought her to that location where she ultimately wound up near a bridge in shallower water. And that's another screenshot from our track area. A little difficult to see, but you can see in the red lines along here, and then the blue lines along here, and then the orange over here. Those are all our tracks. So those were our initial strategies. So we didn't get past leaving the river. Our UAV was in some wooded area this way near her home initially, but that's where we concentrated our resources. If it hadn't been for the obvious hazard, though, of the river area, which would be synonymous with despondent behavior perhaps as well, we may have had some difficulty in really determining where we should be looking first, or where our priority tasks should be. So, there's always a need for up-to-date and accurate information coming from either the complainant or the caregivers or the family as to what their current abilities are, or how progressed their challenges may be. And we need to have immediate access to this. And this can also extend to care facilities. And what we find quite common is we will ask certain specific questions and the answers are unknown. And not to say that that's unacceptable, but it becomes very difficult for searchers to really get a good read on how we profile this person. We also feel that this message can't come from the police. Of course, when we ended up looking for somebody and we're now deployed, it's too late. Obviously, we are in the phase where it's an emergency situation, and so that critical information that's provided to us has to be almost immediate. A delay in that information is going to be a delay in an accurate response plan. Ultimately, what we see is accurate information, which I've discussed, calling police right away. It's common that in the desperation of noticing that a loved one is missing who is living with dementia, you are just going to go naturally out and look yourself. And that's fine, provided that it's synonymous with calling 911 or 999, whatever the case may be. Noelana has spent a lot of time communicating and understanding the signs of onset dementia, as well as the worsening symptoms of that as well. And we need to make caregivers more aware of that. Because the risks just, can skyrocket quite rapidly. And then related to this, what kind of mitigation strategies can we suggest to people? Better securing your home, consider a tracking device of some kind, video on your home. But at the same time, understanding, and I recognize that there's a balance between these kinds of Fort Knoxing your home, so to speak, and then providing an environment where the person who's living with dementia feels safe and maintain some privacy, dignity, and autonomy as well, because we do want them to feel as though they have independence still. It's very important. We don't want to suggest, from the police perspective especially, to lock people in. That's just the incorrect message. But what we want to try and communicate is how do we mitigate the risk of someone being missing for a long period of time. Better locks, video for direction of travel, chimes on the door, so it's a notification to a family member or loved one that the door has been opened when maybe it shouldn't have been. And then when we speak about GPS technology, fantastic tech when it works, that's the caveat. But consider devices maybe that, by suggestion, that are multi-purpose instead of just a tracking device. I've seen several times that people living with dementia, they don't want to be tracked. They understand that this is a tracking device, and they don't like it. But what about a device that does other things, tells time, it counts their footsteps, but at the same time, breadcrumbs where you are because it's a GPS compatible device is a strategy that we're using more here. And that's related to another search that we came across, not dementia, but despondent, where an individual was suicidal and he wore a Fitbit, and they were able to track his breadcrumbs to where all of a sudden the device just didn't work anymore. And that's because of the death associated with that and the circumstances under which that person killed themselves. So these are the kinds of things that you know, we're looking at, understanding the balance between securing and independence. And the caveat to this is, from a police perspective, you know, I think it's also important to communicate to people who aren't in the search and rescue world the level of desperation that searchers internalize and feel. My sergeant is sitting next to me nodding his head, because we see these calls come across our screen, and we see that it's someone who is perhaps living with dementia, verified or otherwise. And we just get this pit in our stomachs because we know the challenges that we're up against. So anything that we can do to mitigate that and to give us the information that we need as searchers is just going to hopefully wind up in success for us.
So Mike, we're over time, which is perfect.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. So we're going to give everyone, because some questions are starting to pop up. So we're going to give you about 2 minutes for Q&A, and hopefully if we have a couple minutes at the end, then we'll bring it back. So I've seen that your lovely boss, Eli, has been responding to some of the questions already. But one of the questions that Katie has asked you, Mike, is, you say that dementia and suicide cases are approached very differently. Have you ever had a case where a person with dementia who is suicidal is missing?
Well, this one. This are you responding to that? This is one. This is something that was unique to us, which is why I brought it up, was because we hadn't seen this. And the question that we discussed from the search management level is, because we don't know enough about the disease, is, do they have the ability to relate those two things together? That you know, we often think of dementia that they don't, you know, for lack of a better expression, know what they're doing. Sometimes they don't recognize certain things. They don't recognize hazards. It's a very debilitating issue. But do they have the cognitive ability to be suicidal? And what was that related to? Is that related to the disease, or is that related to something else? So this was unique for us. So to Katie's question, no, we haven't had this actually. So it was unique to us.
And then we'll just take, we have one more question before we get Anders and Rebecca to share their screen. And actually, while you answer this question, Mike, Anders and Rebecca, would you mind sharing your screen so we can get started right away? So the question is from Lauren McLennan. So Lauren was wondering, Mike, what processes do you have in place for after someone with dementia is found?
So, I mean, if it's a search that our team is deployed and involved in, which is a ground search where we have significant resources, we have, you know, after action reports that we submit. Our search managers get together quarterly, as well as for 1 week training twice a year, where we debrief these significant searches, regardless of the outcome. The assessment portion, where we assess the risk and the decision to deploy, and then what strategies and what the actual search plan was. We have 29 search managers with our police service, and they are all together for that, and we essentially run a debrief on every single search that we do.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you so much, Mike. And so now we're going to bring in Rebecca and Anders to give another different perspective, this time from Sweden. So we'll leave it after you, Rebecca and Anders.
Okay, Anders, do you put up our file? Good.
Steve, is it the right one or is it the wrong one?
It's the wrong one.
I'll try to pull it over. If it worked, I haven't changed anything there. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start with a little background and how we work. And Yes.
Still, we can't see the presentation filling the screen yet.
You cannot. It worked just earlier.
So if you'd like to leave that open, yeah,
Oh.
there you go. And then if you want to play the presentation.
Mhm.
Okay, so try to stop sharing your screen and then you can go back into the PowerPoint if you'd like.
Now I'm out.
Yeah, so then go back into share screen and then click on the PowerPoint feature. If you have to make sure that the PowerPoint window is up.
It's on the wrong screen, I think.
Then I bring up mine. If it's
No,
okay.
we're good to go now, Anders. Oh, you had it there.
I had it. Okay. Take some time. Is it there now?
Yes.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Then we start. Sweden, population of about 10 million on the surface, double as big as the United Kingdom, but merely not more than 5% of Canada's. We have a mostly wilderness terrain. 90% is what I call difficult terrain. Last year we had 27,000 disappearances reported to the police, but only 9,000 of them were high priority cases. And they are in average solved in about 2 hours. And from these 9,000 high priority cases, we have about 410 to be precise last year, that developed into full-scale search and rescue operations. And in order to handle them, we use the help from the armed forces. They have helicopters and personnel on foot.
Anders, can you put that picture on? Because we can't see that picture.
There it is. Now,
yeah.
We use the Coast Guard, but because they have advanced surveillance airplanes. And we're even supported by NGOs as the Mountain Rescue Association, both in the mountains and in the woodlands. And we even use the Naval Rescue Association because we have got a long coastline and thousands of lakes and a huge amount of islands to be searched in these waters. And of course, missing people and similar organizations. We manage these missing persons in two main ways, either as an operational search or by a traditional investigation, depending on the severity of the case. The two biggest categories we are searching for is people with dementia and what we call depressed. That's everything between despondents to suicidals. They form about 25% of all cases each. So these two together is 50% of all our cases. We have more than 130,000 people with dementia, and it's increasing. They are very vulnerable and in great danger when they are lost. We have about 170,000 with some psychiatric diagnosis. And how do we do it? We have learned that time is essential for a successful outcome. The personnel in the first line is our command and control room personnel, police officers and civilians, and then our regular uniform units working out in the real life. We expect them to act swiftly in the high priority cases, and in order to do so, they need simple but effective methods. We have developed what we call the INL method. It's the first three letters in the Swedish word inleda, That's the same as an initiate, easy to remember. The I stands for information. You can't get enough of that. And you have to search and dig for information. The letter N stands for near search. It's the immediate surroundings around the PLS and eventually the home. They are searched in a very thorough way, and we found about 10% of our missing persons in this near search. The letter L stands for Swedish word ledstång. That's the same as handrail, something you hold on to keep the direction when you're moving around. That's, for example, roads, paths, watercourses, fences, telephone and power lines. And we're finding approximately 34% of our missing persons on these handrails, most of them very early.
Can I take on from there and go on to profiles? So we,
yes.
I'm very anxious to get the question going. So can you change picture? Okay. Background in the meetings last year in Linköping and Dundee between researchers and police officers. We felt very much that there is a need for validation and starting to work with profiles, understanding profiles better. So Anders and I started a very small experiment with my students to give them 3 kinds of profiles of persons with dementia, since it is such a big group in all countries to work with. And the students had a case, and then they should pick some hot sectors to search on and hand in a map where they have put it in. And the findings were not so good because our students were not so good at reading maps. But unexpectedly, we got very much reflections, questions, and even more questions about the quality of how to work with profiles, what make profiles usable for different persons, with speed to understand profiles. Just like Mike was into how to, which profile to choose, or should we choose both, and what's happened if you combine them, and so on. And I tried to get some research, to find some research about this, and I didn't, not in this area, not in search and rescue. Can you please change picture? Anders, can you? Yeah, and these were the, you can look at them later on. The students got the Swedish police handbook and also the grandparent research material from Gibbon Walnut and I find. And as you can see, to some extent they are quite similar, but there are also differences between them. You can look at them by yourself later on when you put up the presentations. Next picture, please. Yeah. I didn't find anything in search and rescue, but in research about criminal profiling, there were long discussions and a lot of papers about quality, about validity, about how reliable different kinds of profiles and different kind of tools to work with profiles were. It seemed to me that there were very much more development of technical tools like geographical information systems and so on. And still, in criminal profiling, you have 2 different kinds, like psychological profiling of who the offender is, or geographical profiling of where or when this offender will be. And in search and rescue, you sort of have to combine this into, well, where is this person when? Can you please change again? See, and when I was looking into them, it seemed to me like a researcher that the basic principles or the basic assumptions here are quite similar. Like if you look at the criminal profiling, for example, that person move very much by routine, and you know, have their space of activity where they go to school, have their house, go to the park, so on. And the same basic assumption is about, for example, people who are depressed, looking for someone to hide. They find a place inside this space of activity or search area, an area which they know where to find a place to hide, or a nice and lonely place to try a suicide, for example. Principle 2 is about distance decay, that this area has a stop, it has an end. If you look into search and rescue, you define a search area, and then you have a probability who is probably very low outside your search area in order to find the person. And the same thinking is in criminal profiling, about that things happening outside this space of activity doesn't belong to this profile or this profile person. And also finally, that person move around very much by least effort, and using traveler aids, handrails, and so on. And the people are organized and disorganized. Please, last picture. Yes. And like Anders said, it's some kind of basic assumption with which different directions. Like in criminal profiling, you're looking backwards. Something has happened out there, and you're looking to find an anchor point. Where is back home? And in search and rescue is the other way around. You have a back home, you have a point last seen, and you want to know where the person is. And our question to all of you others is, how do you combine this already? Is this new only to us? Or if it is new, would it be some kind of path to explore better about profiling and making profiles and working with profiling tools? And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so
That's
much, Anders and Rebecca. So we'll open it up to that question now. So we have about 3 to 4 minutes. So everyone feel free to message on the chat box. And if you have something that's really burning, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask Rebecca as well. So we just had a comment in the chat from Joe Apps. He said that we have tried to use our geographic profilers and behavioral profilers for missing episodes without success.
With no success?
With no success, yes.
Okay, we have to talk about this, Joe, later on.
This is because the way in which they operate their business isn't conducive for immediate searches.
Okay.
So they're looking, the geographic profiles, for example, have a scene of a serious sexual assault, and then to try to find routes that the offender might have taken to go back home, and then we'll try and guess where the home might be through an assessment of the evidence. And they'll then indicate different areas where the offender is likely to live based on the sorts of principles you were talking about. And the same comes up with behavioural profilers as well, who are tending to profile the behaviour of a criminal rather than a non-criminal in terms of a missing person. And each time we've asked, they say, "Oh no, our business service isn't like that, so we wouldn't be able to assist you." It's worth a longer conversation. I know, Rebecca.
I think it's a road to explore, and especially these technical tools developed.
And this is the whole purpose of the consortium. We're getting a taste of this with hopes that there's going to be these types of conversations after. So this is exciting. So we just had a few more comments in the chat. So from Jamie Sterling, he had said that the lost person questionnaire is a document that could assist. And then from Giles, said just to push awareness about the Herbert protocol that is used in the UK. And then Michael responded that he agrees that the Herbert protocol has been shown to be very useful across police forces in the UK. So it's something that's really important to note. So we'll have one more burning question, or we have one from Sue. I wasn't aware that the Herbert protocol when dad had dementia. So even something that we have learned is that some of these protocols that are in place, a lot of people don't know about them yet. So sometimes education and awareness on the existing tools might be just as important to be able to assist. So we'll leave it at that for now. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. Thank you again so much, Rebecca and Anders. So now it's Jamie and I's turn. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Alrighty. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk more so about the future, or where we foresee things going within search and rescue. So our topic is on what is self-sovereign identity, and is it of interest among persons with dementia and their care partners? All right, so leave it up to you, Jamie.
Good. My name's Jamie Sterling. I spent 31 years with the Ontario Provincial Police, and 28 of that were in search and rescue. I'm now the president of Secure.io, a Canadian corporation that keeps you safe and your data safer. My career started through the years as a basic searcher. Then I turned into training, a provincial trainer for the OPP, and then on to coordinating major calls and events within the province of Ontario, such as the Pan Am Games. We involve our partners in SAR in the air with our Department of National Defense, as well as we engage them on the ground as well, especially in our remote communities in Northern Ontario, north of the 50th parallel, where we're Arctic tundra is quite often our terrain up there. I also spent a large portion of my career as a spokesperson for the OPP about their search and rescue program and testifying at inquests and judicial processes as required. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about search and rescue and the science of SAR and how it's transformed over the years. When we started search, or at least when I did in the late 80s, we did a lot of walking in the bush, looking for things. And at the end of the day, the senior guy on the team would say, hey, how well did you search that bush? And, you know, they'd say, well, we did a good job. We think it's good. But, you know, at the end of the day, what did that mean? So we started introducing math into it, and with people like Ken Hill out of Nova Scotia, and then we brought Bob Kester out of Virginia with lost person behavior, where we used analytics of people's behavior. Those numbers brought favorable changes to the search outcomes. We started finding people, whereas in the late 80s, they found themselves primarily. In the last 20 years, GPS technology has been introduced and streamlined, along with streamlined documentation, which is very important. And then we also started bringing in resources that are capable of capturing clues, like unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. Now, most of the searches, as you saw actually in the debrief, are under 12 hours. And I'd say that was very typical of what the Ottawa Police did. It was a great job after they were notified, a very timely response. But what I found as a stakeholder, most of the industry stakeholders weren't talking to each other. They were only using pieces of data to help them in the search. And it was during my time with the Victoria Stafford search in Woodstock, Ontario, where we had a 8-year-old girl that was abducted. And I saw the real need for data. That was an 80-day search where the first 20 days was searching one landfill. And we had over 578 tasks and 5 terabytes of data. And so I'll just speak on one form of data here, and it's GPS data. And it can be obtained from a variety of sources, whether they're handheld GPS units or watches or Fitbits on our missing person, or even on our searches. This data is different from any other data, like information you might get from lost people, because you can't alter the data. It's being obtained from satellites. It's pure. And from that, we're able to get where they were, when they started their track, how long they were out for, and have it documented down to the meter. If we drill it down even further, we're able to get that cookie crumb trail, and it's time stamped with the lat long, how fast they walk. And now this data that we're obtaining from how well did you search that area is changed. It's quantified, it's numeric. We're able to establish a probability of detection that we would have found. Now, using this one source of data, just in the Stafford case alone, I was able to say we traveled 18,188 kilometers by foot. So that's 1.5 times around the moon. So that's very compelling when you use data. And just think of that one type of data But now we're able to bring in different data from different data sets and different devices. Let's take it a step further. We'll use data to help keep people from getting lost. Through digital identity, we're allowed people to determine where their data goes, and we're able to produce things like artificial intelligence that will help them in their daily routines and provide guidance when needed. The care partner, through this data, has now as a peace of mind and also a timely notification should their loved one need help. One additional item that we have that is that we're looking at in Elena's future works is about digital guardianship. What does that mean? Is there traditional power of attorney, or will we be able to have digital data, somebody that's able to take care of that data once the person is unable to? Notification to law enforcement will happen differently in the future. It's going to be through verified credentials. It'll allow law enforcement to confirm the identity of the lost person and actually receive additional intelligence from that person's sources of data, like a Fitbit. It will also maybe contain the lost person behavior profile that were there, as well as the individual's profile, which will significantly reduce the investigation time and help those first responders attending. And we know now that we're able to integrate this digital identity, allows us to integrate and simultaneously share that data with the research community, because currently they don't have that access to those data sets. And so we know it's important for research to find solutions to keep people safe tomorrow. And it empowers those people that are managing dementia to be in charge, and not only to be in charge of their day-to-day life, but of what happens with their data as well. So I will pass it off to Nolana here to wrap up our portion.
All right, thank you so much, Jamie. So within my perspective, so by all means, I don't have any experience within policing and search and rescue. So why exactly am I presenting alongside Jamie with the policing perspective? Well, my background is within a healthcare context. And what Jamie and I have been doing over the span of the last year is we've been trying to explore this concept of self-sovereign identity in more detail. And I wanted to make sure that we reflected individuals with dementia and their care partners, because this piece of technology is so brand new. So when we started exploring this project a little bit further, self-sovereign identity, it has yet to be applied within a public health context. So before we could even get started in terms of trying to deploy such a piece of technology, first of all, we wanted to be able to see, are individuals with dementia and care partners interested in this piece of tech? And can we develop it in a term that's actually understandable to the public? Because I myself, when I first started this project, I had no idea what self-sovereign identity was. So I only knew that the public would have a hard time understanding this. And as what Jamie had highlighted, data is absolutely essential, not only for police and search and rescue, but also for other programs that police might be working alongside, such as Project Lifesaver or other ones. We need to be able to have data to be able to get programs funded and even various strategies subsidized. So data becomes quite essential, so we know just how many people with dementia are getting lost and going missing, and are some of these different programs and measures effective. So what I did in a fancy form was I followed something called a hybrid model for concept development. It involved 3 different phases, and I'll very briefly go through these. So the first one was a theoretical phase. All this involved was me looking far and wide in the published literature that's available to academics, and then the literature that's available to the public through Google. I came across 25 different definitions of self-sovereign identity and 13 from Google. And what I did was I took this information, I tried to simplify it and break it up into 5 digestible chunks as to what makes self-sovereign identity self-sovereign identity. So within this, one, it was digital identity, because we're talking about digitized data. The second key piece was decentralized authority, because right now most of our data is housed within third-party organizations. So within healthcare, it's housed within Alberta Health Services, for example, where I am, and you have to ask for permission to get access to your data. But in this context, you now own it and you decide where it goes. This in turn would provide more ownership and control to the public, and then in turn, it provides them with more privacy and security. So after this, I took this information, I turned it into a 1 to 2 page summary that I was able to use for the interviews that I did with 10 individuals with dementia and 10 care partners. And we also created a video that kind of gave them more of a case scenario as to how self-sovereign identity could be applied for those with dementia that get lost and go missing. And overall, people were quite happy with it. One of the individuals with dementia, for example, stated that, "I like the concept. And from my point of view, it sounds to me like it's a system that would help me." And what I mean is that there's an app on our phone that identifies who I am. And that approach, that would help me in a big way. So it was quite exciting to hear that there is some potential promise of self-sovereign identity among this population. However, as it pertained to the term itself, as I mentioned, I had no idea what self-sovereign identity was. So for the care partners and the persons living with dementia that it interviewed, they completely agreed. So one of the care partners, for example, had stated, "It doesn't really come across very easily to understand and what it is that you're trying to do. Instead of saying self-sovereign identity, it should say you own your identity, you own it, it's yours, and you're the one that decides what to do with it." And one of the individuals with dementia had said that the name is kind of confusing, specifically the word sovereign, and I couldn't agree more. So after taking this information, we wanted to use the same participants and we brought them forward into 2 different focus groups. So I had one focus group for the individuals living with dementia, and then I had one for the care partners. And then we started to work together side by side to be able to come up with, do we need to co-create a new term? Or can we come up with a catchphrase to be able to help make self-sovereign identity more understandable? Well, after the discussions and ideas were flying in both rooms, we came to the decision that because self-sovereign identity is being used far and wide, we decided that a catchphrase would be quite useful. So a catchphrase, what I mean by that is if we think of the company Nike, you don't hear Nike, you hear Nike and then they say, "Just do it." So it gives them more of a context about that company. So in the case of self-sovereign identity, this group had voted and came up with self-sovereign identity. It's about secure data ownership. So it helps make things a little bit more sense. So for some of the key findings from the work that I've done with Jamie is that involving end users is absolutely integral in the conceptualization of new terminology in the tech sector. When I've spoken to those within the blockchain group, they were surprised that individuals with dementia could do such a thing and help me be able to develop a new term. But that just, a lot of people underestimate the power that this population has, and by allowing them to be able to share their voices and their opinions, it's going to help develop technology that is truly applicable to them. And persons with dementia care partners that I'd interviewed, they definitely have a keen interest in assisting in the self-sovereign identity movement, and we plan on trying to involve them moving forward. So the next steps for our work is that the findings are being used in case studies that examine the application of self-sovereign identity for collecting and sharing data of missing persons with dementia. And over the next 4 months, as Jamie had alluded to, we plan on exploring this concept of guardianship, who gets ownership of this data in more detail over the next 4 months. So that is it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and we're just going to open it up to questions for the next few minutes, and then I'll just bring it off to some concluding statements for the last minute or so. All right, so I'm just looking here. So we had a comment from Al. So Nolana, do you have a paper or a detailed description of this that you can share? So yes, I ended up writing a nice long document for Jamie once we completed the first phase of this project. And my goal this summer is to get it published. But I can definitely share these slides if this is of interest, and I can discuss this further. But it was a really exciting study in the self-sovereign identity community. They loved hearing about us involving those with dementia, and they want to be able to hear more about it and how they can involve this population, which I think is a really good start. So does anyone else have any other questions? I know that this self-sovereign identity is still very new, and it's sometimes your head is swimming all over the place. But if you do have a question later on, we'll feel free to share our contact information. So I have a question from Michael. So how about when people have lost the capacity to consent? So that is exactly what guardianship will be. And we're going to be using the case of individuals living with dementia, but of course this could be applied to many other individuals with cognitive impairment, with children, with refugees. There's a lot that guardianship could be used. But again, we want to be able to involve those with dementia. We had a very brief conversation with them because in some cases, you have all your identity, your entire data is going to be sitting with you. And so you want to have a trusted person. But some of us, we might not have close family members that we would trust to share that information. So who could we actually share that information with? These are some questions that we need to be able to try to answer. All right, well, what I'll do is I'll do a concluding statement.
No, Lana, we just have James wants to speak. If I'm just going to unmute his microphone for him.
Sounds good.
Or, no, James, I think you have to unmute it yourself. Sorry.
I'd like to thank everybody for speaking in a way I could understand today. Last time it was far too fast. I couldn't take in. So it was a lot better today. So thank you very, very much.
No, thank you, James, for joining in. We're so happy. Those that live with dementia, I've seen quite a few that have joined in, and we're doing all this work for you guys. So just to be able to see that you're a part of this, it means a lot to us. So, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a concluding remark, and then if anyone wants to stick around for a couple minutes to ask questions, we can definitely do that. So 1 second here. All right. So this is the contact information for Jamie and myself. And again, you can feel free to send us a message and we can share information if need be. But just for a summary and concluding remarks from today. So over the last 45 minutes, hopefully you've been able to get a little taste of the police perspective as it pertains to lost and missing persons with dementia from Canadian and Swedish contexts. While there has been incredible work in this area, as what you've heard from our presenters, there is still so much more that needs to be done. Education more than ever is becoming paramount, not only among police services in terms of how to search and interact with people living with dementia, but also in educating the public as to how complex search and rescue really is. So 3 of our 5 presenters you heard from today are actually a part of an initiative called the Rapid Response Project, which is run through the Finding Your Way program with the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario. So Mike Adlard, Jamie Sterling, and myself. And over the last 2 years, we have sought to fill this education gap through the development of education resources and awareness campaigns. And we're only beginning to scratch the surface in terms of how we can educate first responders and members of the public. So as a final statement to close this webinar off, just to start to get things continuing to flow, I'd like to invite all of you to engage more in these conversations with police representatives when they're present. Police, they're a lot more approachable than we think. They want to learn, they want to be able to hear your perspective. So we'd love to be able to see more of these conversations going on. And doing so will not only help to improve the outcomes of search and rescue operations, but again, as what Mike had shared, it will also help us in the shift between balancing safety and autonomy among those that live with dementia. Allow them to engage in their community, but ensure that they do so in a safe manner. So just as a little reminder, this is week 2. We still have many more weeks to come. Next week, we're going to be continuing on this technology train, talking about drones, global positioning systems, and mobile apps. So we'll have researchers as well as a representative from Alzheimer's Scotland that will be speaking. And then after this, we're going to be following on with 2 weeks of lived experience. So we're going to be having those that live with dementia speaking, care partners, and then we're going to start to close things off July 23rd with the research on citizenship, neuroscience, and locating, and then we're going to do a final discussion and networking. And you might hear a little bit more about some of the work that Katie and I have done as well. So that is it for the webinar. Again, I know that we're on time today, which is exciting, but if you have burning questions, again, feel free to join in. I will sit back and I will want to see the conversation going. And again, the purpose of this consortium is not just to give you information, but because there's so much work that needs to be done, feel free to connect with someone that you think might be interested and you want to continue the conversation moving forward. That's really what we're trying to look for with this group. So thank you, everyone.
So can I ask you a question, Enola?
Of course, Roger.
I know we talked about the self-sovereign, protecting data and all that. Can you give an example how it looks in the real world?
Yeah. Yeah, so the way that it could work in the real world is essentially there would be a potential app that you would have. As you know that your phone collects all this information about where you go, but because sharing data, let's say for police and for research, it's very private information. Something that we've been exploring is trying to anonymize your identity. So we don't know who you are, but we're getting the information that we need to be able to understand what's going on. So, and from what we've discussed with others is that by anonymizing your data, that might make people more inclined to share their information. And the concept of big data is becoming so much bigger because we need information to be able to tell you if Project Lifesaver is effective, if GPS devices are effective. We can't say anything. So we're hoping that this self-sovereign identity and anonymizing it and allowing you to share your information and deciding where it goes might help.
So in the real world.
In the real world.
Yeah, but what I mean is, who would use this?
So any person would essentially have the app, and then they'd feel free to just share their information. So
no, what I mean is on the other end. People,
on the other end, who would use it?
I have the app and people are reaching out to me.
Yeah.
Who would use it?
Jamie, did you want to try to answer that?
Well, the good thing about it, Roger, is we'll be able to take that data, your name and your particulars that the police would normally collect anyway, and we're able to push that information to law enforcement through a private or secure data source. And so they're able to get that information that it's Roger Marple and where Roger lives and date of birth and all that, and it's verified through the governments. Like in Canada, you're lucky, Roger. British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario are going to this digital verification system. So they know that that data is authentic and it's real because it's got, like, you know, on your driver's license, it maybe has a stamp on it or a hologram. Well, in the electronic world, it will have a similar thing that verifies it, that's government identification. So we're able to streamline that process. So then they get the information and they know what they have going to the call versus not knowing what they have till they actually get there. And then the notification thing that we heard in Mike's case earlier, where he was, excuse me, but it was a few hours, I think, before you were notified, where we'll able to do that notification through artificial intelligence. So if it's not normal for that person to leave the house through the middle of the night, we know that, and there'll be a notification sent to your caregiver, your care partner, or to law enforcement should you fall or something that's out of the normal. So we'll set up that criteria for those notifications prior to the incidents even happening. So it does the thinking for you, which is,
and when someone wants to get access to your information, Roger, so let's talk about just common social media like Facebook. So anyone can go and grab your information, then you have no idea about it. You just end up finding that someone stole and created a new profile that has all your info on it. But the beautiful thing and with self-sovereign identity, you actually get notification as to who is trying to get access to it. So then you know who they are. And if you don't know who they are, then you're not going to share it. So that really adds that sense of, again, power as to you decide who gets access to it, and you only let those that you trust get access to it.
Yeah. So it would interact with social media programs, stuff like that?
Yeah, no, not in this case, but we would hope in the dream world that self-sovereign identity would change everything.
So yeah, so your Fitbit, Roger, or your watch, you know, that you normally walk with, that has your heart rate and that, we'll be able to get information from those sources as well, but we're able to encrypt it, make it secure communications, which can't be hacked. And then what the good thing about this is we're able now to link in research. So we'll be able to multiply the Bob Kesters and all the great work that's being done around the world. And that information will ultimately go to law enforcement. And then actually in my big dream is then law enforcement will also get information as to where we'll increase their areas of probability, where they should be searching, giving your individual profile as well as your group behavior profile.
I know that James wants to speak.
Usually an hour does me in, so I'm feeling quite tired, so I'll have to leave you all. Love you and leave you. But I made a couple of notes and I'll be writing to you later on today. So look out for it. Bye, everybody.
Sounds good.
Bye, James. Bye.
So the whole thing is basically encrypting everything. I wanted the information, say, to go to you, Jamie. No one else can see. Basically, it's just keeping my information super secure.
Yep,
Right?
exactly. And then taking that information that is like sitting there, like your Fitbit, all that that's not being used, and you can
Right.
actually use it to help inform research and help police.
Wow.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Okay, it's not just on the sovereignty thing, but if a person was wandering and you have a profile on them, but perhaps they're carrying a knife or they're carrying a gun, are the police all specially trained about peacefully dealing with this? And it just seems there's been so many things in the news lately that implies that a person that has a mental issue at the time, and that could be a person wandering with dementia, it hasn't been very pleasant outcome. And it's, I just wondered if the police have special training, because this could be totally unexpected. You don't know they're going to be carrying something with them. And it's, do they have that skill for talking them down, so to speak?
So I'll start and then I'll leave it off to Jamie. But a part of that rapid response project that I briefly had mentioned, Janet, we are trying, there's police, they have a lot of information that they have to take in when they go to police college. What I know in Ontario is they have about an hour to learn about dementia, which isn't a lot. So part of this project that I've been on with the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario, and Jamie and we have other police representatives throughout that province, is trying to find other ways of being able to educate them. Because a lot of times it just comes down to they have to be experts in all these different areas and they just don't know how to approach it. So if we provide more education, we're hoping that that's just going to be able to help things even further. And I find that in the media, they just don't talk about, they want to blame the police, but they don't want to learn about what's going on in the back end. How many other different things that they're doing, because they're not just doing search and rescue, they're addressing other different crimes, they're addressing so many different things. So Jamie, you could feel free to. And same thing, Mike, I see that you're on the end, so you guys can feel free to talk.
Sure, Janet. And I think obviously this is a global call, so there's different levels of training and police response throughout the world. But for the most part, they are trained in, maybe not necessarily in dementia and how to handle it, talking face to face with somebody, and slowly and clearly. However, they do know how to receive de-escalation training. And the first level of that is talking to the person. And so they're able to use talking and communication skills to try and de-escalate that crisis that that person is in. And I think it'll be far different from dementia to mental health to people that are suffering from depression. And there is not one tactic or one skill that will solve all the solutions for us. And I think right now, and especially in our global crisis, we're seeing a lot of these incidents are being amplified. I mean, there's more of them because of what's going on. And unfortunately, in our social media world, you're only seeing the last 20 seconds of the incident or the last 6 seconds of the incident. You're not necessarily seeing the 20 minutes or the half hour or the hour that it takes prior to that incident for that 20 seconds to unfold. And you're also not able to notice, all the other background things that are going on in that call, that are internal to that person, as well as the external influences like law enforcement there. So it's very difficult, but and that's why you see all those tools on the law enforcement officers. They're lethal and non-lethal tools, and usually they will exhaust all their non-lethal options. There might be I'll call it a taser. It's a conducted energy weapon, or a baton, or their hands. They'll exhaust all those before they go to the lethal use of force. Okay, but they have to weigh those options before they use the ultimate one. So
No, and I realize that, and I do appreciate what the police do. But as you just said, it's impossible for them to have all the knowledge about all the different mental health issues. And the idea of teaming, which is not new. I mean, many places team a police officer with a person with mental health skills to make visits where this is needed. So the police don't have to know it all.
And then that's like the purpose of the consortium as well. So it's, well, police, for the longest time, we've all been working in individualized silos. Police would do their own thing, health would do their own thing. But there's a shift now where we need to all work together. There's a police organization in Ontario where they have hired a social worker. She works for the police. And so there's that shift. And if we were able to bring in all the expertise rather than relying on one person, that's just going to help things even further.
Right. And one thing you gotta, and I know even Mike in his small jurisdiction of Ottawa, I know they'll have mental health teams or people that are on duty to assist, but it takes time. There's time and distance that it takes for those resources to get to those calls. And they quite often don't get there in minutes, it may be hours. So that's why the law enforcement is that try to stabilize the situation till those resources can get there. And maybe they can't get there, but they get them at the hospital or the treatment center afterwards.
And a comment that came from Christine Wright, she said that she can't speak for everyone, but she can say that she works for an Alzheimer's Society in Ontario, so Sarnia. And she said that their local police, so the city and the Ontario Provincial Police, they have brought the Alzheimer's Society in for yearly training often, and they have really great partners. So hearing those kind of experiences and those partnerships are amazing, and we hope to see more of them.
Thank you.
No problem. So I know that we're going quite a bit over time, but again, it's I'll wait until we're all done, and then we can close things off. But
I think it's been great, and it's good to see that we've got 29 people still on the call here, and I think it's
amazing.
awesome to be able to talk freely and exchange ideas and hear different perspectives. And we see right from the research community to people that are directly affected by dementia to even caregivers here and industry people. So this has been, you're truly accomplishing one of your goals, Katie and Nolana, Libby, sort of the older guard there. I don't know if Meredith is online right now, but you folks did an awesome job. So I'm proud of that.
Can I just ask if maybe on when you're collecting the data, if, I mean, I work with young people who are deaf. I'm about to work with people with dementia. And obviously there's a large population that are deaf, some of whom obviously are BSL users. It might be useful on a wider scale as part of the data to find out if people needed interpreters, and obviously what their first or home language is as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point, Sue. Thank you. We'll make sure that we keep that into consideration.
Christine has her hand raised. Christine, if you would like to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi. Sorry, everyone, and sorry I'm late. I couldn't find the link, of course, you know.
That's okay. I sent it off to you.
I have dementia. What can I say? So I have a question, and it may have been answered, but I was just listening, and I just thought, okay, so, you know, I heard them talking about that they brought the Alzheimer's in to do training.
Yeah.
Have they also brought people living with dementia in to help collaborate on what that training could look like from the people who actually live with it, and can maybe give a different perspective on the type of help they may need?
For the individual training, I can't speak on behalf of that, but at least within the Finding Your Way program, they do regional, or they'll do, every year they'll do a provincial forum, and we always make sure that we have someone with dementia that's there that shares their perspective.
Right.
And it's something that's always been at the forefront for everything that, at least within the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario, we've been trying to do, is always there's someone with dementia that's there. And Paul Lee, who's been joining us on the call, so Paul has been amazing. He's been there, and of course we're always open to trying to involve others, because Paul's perspective, while amazing as it is, we always want to involve others living with dementia as well.
Right. Yeah, so I know that you do an excellent job of that. I was just wondering about, you know, the other groups that that provide training, if they're insuring, or the groups like for RCMP and paramedics and those people, are they ensuring that when they are wanting to have someone come into training, they're making it abundantly clear that they want someone with the lived experience included?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that was my question.
Christine Wright, I know that you're on the call and you're with the Alzheimer's Society in Sarnia. Do you guys involve someone with dementia with your education session, or is it just
I'll show my face. So I haven't had the chance to actually bring someone with dementia in to speak at my presentations, mostly just because when I do police training, it's 8 weeks in a row, and it's just been very hard to have somebody be able to attend all those. But I would say in general, with my presentations, we have a number of early stage support groups at our office. And I always go to them and ask for their feedback on what they want other people to know. I've also gone to a care partner who had an incident with her husband to say your feedback on how the police handled all that, and brought that forward as well. So I'd say in general, in all my presentations, I learn much more from our clients than anybody else, and I try to bring that forward the best I can.
Yeah. Cool. But I know that this still has to become more standard practice, Christine. Yeah. I know that with Dementia Alliance International, while it's starting, it's not enough. And I'm sure Roger, saw your head nod. And this should almost become one of the outcomes perhaps of the consortium, or key terms, is everything that you do, if it involves you guys, we have to involve you guys in everything.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I've been thinking lately is I'd like just have a more formalized, hey, this is the time we're meeting. This is when I want to get your feedback on them doing this present, because my role is education. Because normally I just chat with people or go into the group and get some feedback, but I'd like to make it a more regular thing and a more formal event as well.
Right.
I'd just like to say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
With all the technology that's available and people living with Alzheimer's dementia, tech can be very confusing. And like the Fitbits, they've got so many functions on them, very confusing. I can't do it. But is there something similar to a Fitbit that would give individuals the time if they want, or have the GPS thing in it, so that if they do wander, I mean, a lot of people will, I mean, it's a watch, and it's not very complicated, so persons living with who might have cognitive issues would be able to understand it and be willingly to wear it, because they don't feel that there's a threat or a confusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think am I coming across?
Yep. Paul, that's funny, because that's one of the things I said, is if it could be like a watch, because most people through their lifetime wear a watch of some type. So they're not going to feel like they're wearing this badge that's flashing, I have dementia. So it allows you to still maintain your dignity, right? And would provide all those functions. And I know from my personal experience with my lifeline that I had through Medical Alert, it was big, it was bulky, to wear it around my neck. If I moved the wrong way, it would get set off, and the next thing you know, the police would be showing up, and the fire, you could hear the fire trucks coming, and it's like, you know, I'm just walking down the street. So it wasn't very practical. So resources got sort of overused, which is a huge cost and a concern. But more importantly, there I am, all of a sudden, you know, surrounded by people, and it's not it takes away my ability to maintain my sense of self, right? So I get what Paul's talking about there.
Hey, Jamie, you should mention technology you work with.
Yeah, so we've got some technology, some partners that we work with, and one of them is Revolutionary Tracker, which I just posted in the chat there. And they are a watch, and it's a smartwatch, and it's got the basic functions of a watch, but if you need help, you can call for help. The challenge with it is it runs off a cellular card, so you have to pay your monthly fee on it, you know, of about $50 depending on your cell providers. And also with Secure, that's one reason why we're seeking feedback from people like Roger and Paul, and I think I saw Ron Bellino on the call, and different people involved with the Mentor world. So we get feedback from you as we're designing the technology. So that way we ensure that we don't overlook anything, because this is where the real learning takes place. I learn the nuances of the challenges that you face, not daily, by the minute or by the hour. So it's important for us to do that so we can design it appropriately for you. So that's why Roger and Paul were really working on the use of artificial intelligence to assist you, because we don't want technology to be a burden. We want it to help you live better, and it's tech for good, not something that you're frustrated at. Because I know my watch here, I don't know if you're still there, but I can use about 3/4 of it, and I think I'm pretty cool. But you know, the data that I can get out of it's incredible. But for me, it's a big process. You know, I got to go through, and I'm very tech savvy. So we're hoping, well, not hoping, we know that we'll be able to streamline that whole process, so that stuff that you were looking at in the last couple of months with us, it'll be changed the next time you see it again in the upcoming months. So we're happy about that.
All right, everyone. Well, we've had an amazing conversation. So we've already 22 minutes past, but I know that everyone has other things to do, so we'll wrap things up. But again, thank you all. And what we'll do, just because it seems to be of interest to be able to chat afterwards, or we'll try to do that for the other webinars, just because the conversations I find they're just as exciting. And Katie and I have been recording this, so people can watch the after conversations as well. So thank you again so much, everyone, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you all, or watching next week's webinar when we talk about technology. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.